Good day, everyone. If you're listening to this right now, chances are you've got your eye on the Melbourne property market. Today, we are going to flip the script. Usually, everyone wants to talk about the hotspots. Everyone wants to know the next suburb that's going to double in value. But in my experience, wealth isn't just made by what you buy. It is protected by what you don't buy. We are navigating a very specific, somewhat tricky economic climate in Victoria right now. High interest rates, changing tenancy laws, construction crises, it's a minefield out there. So, in this episode, I'm going to walk you through the 4 specific types of property that I strongly recommend you avoid in the current Melbourne market. These are the money pits, the equity traps, and the white elephants that look like opportunities but are actually liabilities. We're going to cover everything from the old land banking strategy to the shiny allure of new apartments. So, grab a coffee, settle in, and let's save you a few $100,000. All right, let's dive right into category number 1. This is a controversial one because, for decades, this was considered the holy grail of Australian real estate strategy. Segment 1, the land value trap, large land, derelict house. I'm talking about the classic big land, rundown house. You know the one. The agent markets it as a renovator's delight or a land value opportunity. It's a massive block, maybe 700 or 800 square meters, but the house sitting on it is falling apart. Historically, the logic was sound. Land appreciates, buildings depreciate. So, buy the land, ignore the house. But in the current Victorian market, this strategy has become incredibly dangerous for 2 main reasons: holding costs and development risk. Let's talk about holding costs first. If you've been following the state budget updates, you know that the Victorian government is aggressive on land tax. The thresholds have lowered and the rates have increased. When you buy a property where the value is entirely in the land, your land tax bill is going to be astronomical. We aren't talking about a few $100s anymore. For many investors, this is a significant annual bleeding of cash. But it gets worse. Let's say you buy this rundown shack. It has good bones, the agent says. But does it? A house that old likely has aging plumbing, dangerous electrical wiring, a heater that hasn't worked since 1998, and maybe a leaky roof. If your plan is to rent this out to offset your mortgage, you are walking into a regulatory nightmare. The Victorian government has significantly tightened the Residential Tenancies Act. You cannot just put a tenant in a freezing, moldy house anymore. There are minimum standards for heating, safety, and amenities. So, you buy the land value deal, and suddenly you are spending tens of thousands just to make it legally rentable. And because the house is old, things will break. You'll be paying for emergency plumbers and electricians constantly. Your rental yield, which was already low because it's an old house, is now being eaten alive by maintenance and land tax. Now, I can hear some of you shouting at your speakers, but I'm not buying it for the rent. I'm buying it to develop. I'll knock it down and build 3 townhouses. Okay, let's look at that. The development plays, knockdown rebuild, major renovation, or subdivision, like a 1-into-3 strategy. Here is the cold, hard reality of the post-2020 world. Construction costs have exploded. Since the pandemic, the cost of timber, steel, concrete, and labor has skyrocketed. We have seen massive, reputable builders go into liquidation, Porter Davis, and many others, leaving projects unfinished. Why? Because they signed fixed-price contracts and then the cost blew out. For you, the small investor, this means the feasibility study you did on the back of a napkin doesn't work anymore. If you buy that big block hoping to build 3 townhouses, by the time you get permits and hire a builder, the construction cost might have risen so much that there is no profit margin left. You might actually lose money developing. The risk profile for small-scale development, waiting 18 months to 2 years for a build, is currently off the charts. So, unless you have extremely deep pockets and a high tolerance for pain, the big land, derelict house strategy is a no-go zone right now. Let's move on to category number 2. This one is less about financial strategy and more about the fundamental quality of the asset. Segment 2, properties with hard flaws. I call these the hard flaw properties, or as some agents call them, challenged assets. What do I mean by a hard flaw? I mean issues that are permanent. You cannot renovate them away. You cannot paint over them. We're talking about properties right next to high-voltage power lines. Properties on main arterial roads or abutting a freeway where the traffic noise is constant. It also includes structural or land-based issues, severe easements that cut through the backyard preventing any future extensions, flood zones, or significant termite histories. Here is the trap. You go to an open inspection. The market is hot. Everything good is selling for $1.2 million. Then, you see this property. It's on a main road, sure, but it's listed for $950,000. You think, wow, I'm getting a bargain. I am saving $250,000. Stop. You're not getting a bargain. You're buying a headache. Why? Because real estate is about liquidity. How easy is it to sell when you need to get out? Currently, the Melbourne market is dominated by owner-occupiers. Investors are shying away because of interest rates and taxes. So who are you selling to? You're selling to a family who wants to live there. Put yourself in their shoes. A family with young kids or light sleepers. Do they want to live on a 6-lane highway? No. Do they want to live under buzzing power lines? No. Owner-occupiers are emotional buyers. They will stretch their budget for a feeling of safety and peace. They will not stretch their budget for a house that shakes every time a truck goes past. And here is the other factor, the renovation cost again. Let's say you buy a house with a fixable hard flaw, like a terrible layout or structural damage. As we just discussed, fixing it is now incredibly expensive. You might buy it cheap, spend $300,000 fixing it, and find that the total cost is higher than if you just bought a good house to begin with. But for the unfixable flaws, the main roads, the power lines, you are stuck. When a market is booming, a rising tide lifts all boats, and you might sell it. But in a flat or correcting market, hard flaw properties become illiquid. They sit on the market for 90 days, 120 days. You have to drop the price. You have to ask yourself, if I am an owner-occupier, would I tolerate this? If the answer is, I'd only buy it if it was dirt cheap, then don't buy it as an investment. Because eventually you will want to sell, and you will face the exact same resistance. Prioritize quality. I would rather buy a smaller house on a quiet street than a mansion on a freeway. Welcome back. We've covered the crumbling shacks and the noisy main roads. Now let's talk about something that looks much prettier. It smells like fresh paint and new carpet. Segment 3. The new build apartment trap. Category number 3 is new build apartments and off-the-plan purchases. Now, I understand the appeal. Walking into a display suite is intoxicating. The glossy brochures, the promise of maintenance-free living, the depreciation benefits for your tax return. It feels like a smart financial move. But in the current Melbourne market, buying a brand new apartment is often one of the fastest ways to lose equity. Here is the mechanics of it. Developers are not charities. They are running a business with massive overheads. They have to pay for the land, the construction, which, remember, is at record highs, the marketing, the display suite, and the commissions to the agent selling the stock. All of those costs are baked into the purchase price. When you buy a brand new apartment for, say, $600,000, you are paying a new car premium. You are paying for the brand new smell. The problem arises the moment you settle. The day you get the keys, that property becomes secondhand. If you try to sell a week later, you're no longer competing with the developer's glossy marketing team. You are competing with the open market. And the open market looks at comparable sales. They look at the apartment building next door that is 3 or 4 years old, still modern, still nice, but selling for $500,000. I see this all the time. People buy off the plan for a premium, and when they go to refinance or sell 3 years later, the bank valuation comes in low. They have lost 10% to 20% of their capital instantly. I've seen cases where the loss is even higher. The gap between the new build price and the secondary market price is massive right now. Furthermore, supply is an issue. In many areas of Melbourne, there is no scarcity of apartments. If you own a house, you own a distinct piece of land. If you own apartment 405 in a block of 300 identical units, you have no competitive advantage when you sell. Don't get dazzled by the depreciation schedule. Saving a few $1,000s on your tax return is not worth losing $100,000 in capital growth. If you want an apartment, buy a slightly older one, maybe from the Art Deco era or the 70s brick era, or even just a 5-year-old one where the initial owner has already taken the depreciation hit. Let them pay the premium, not you. This brings us to our fourth and final category. This one is a bit subtler, and it often trips up people who think they're doing the right thing by building their dream home. Segment 4. The misplaced mansion. Category 4 is the luxury home in an average or poor suburb. We've all seen this. You drive through a suburb that is, let's be honest, a bit rough. Maybe it's a working class area, far from the city, median house price around $700,000. And then suddenly, bam, there's a French provincial chateau. A massive double-story concrete monolith with pillars, lions at the gate, and a 6-car garage. It looks impressive, but economically, it's a disaster. This is the classic case of overcapitalization. It is buying or building a house that is completely out of step with the demographic and pricing ceiling of the suburb. Here is the psychology of buyer. Let's say you spend $1.5 million building this masterpiece in a suburb where the average sale is $750,000. When you go to sell, who is your buyer? A buyer with a $1.5 million budget usually has choices. They could buy your mansion in the average suburb, or they could buy a decent, standard family home in a premium suburb, one with better schools, better cafes, better transport, and higher historical capital growth. Most buyers with that kind of money will choose the better location. They're buying the postcode, not just the bricks. The buyer who wants to live in your average suburb usually doesn't have $1.5 million. They have $750,000. So you have created a product with no audience. I've seen this in the western suburbs of Melbourne specifically. People build these landmark homes thinking they're elevating the area. But when they sell, they get crushed. They might get 5 groups through the open home, whereas the standard house down the street gets 30 groups. The standard house sells for a premium because of competition. The mansion sits there because it's an outlier. You also have to consider the financing aspect, and this is crucial in a high-interest rate environment. Most buyers in Melbourne are borrowing money. Banks are conservative. If a valuer goes out to a suburb where every sale is under $800,000, and you present them with a contract for $1.5 million, the valuer is going to be nervous. They might downvalue the property, meaning the buyer can't get the loan. So you're limiting your buyer pool to cash-rich people who specifically want that suburb, which is a tiny, tiny needle in a haystack. The old saying is true, buy the worst house in the best street, not the best house in the worst street. Don't be the big fish in the small pond. Be the small fish in the ocean of a blue-chip suburb. So let's recap. The Melbourne market is shifting. The strategies that worked in 2015 or even 2019 do not work today. We are avoiding the large land and rundown house because holding costs and construction risks are too high. The hard flaw properties, because in a picky owner-occupier market, you will never resell them for a good price. New build apartments, because the new premium evaporates instantly, leaving you with negative equity. The misplaced mansion, because you're overcapitalizing and alienating your buyer pool. Conclusion, what should you do? So what should you buy? While this episode focused on what to avoid, the inverse usually holds the key. Look for investment-grade properties. Look for established houses or older, boutique villa units / townhouses with land content. Look in suburbs where there is a depth of demand, where both families and professionals want to live. Look for properties that are livable now, but have scope for cosmetic improvement later when construction costs stabilize. And always prioritize the land-to-asset ratio, but not at the expense of buyability. The market right now is actually offering some great opportunities for those who are selective. Prices in some blue-chip areas have softened, allowing entry for smart investors who know how to dodge these 4 traps. Be the CEO of your portfolio. Don't get emotional about a bargain if that bargain has a high-voltage tower in the backyard. Don't get seduced by the display sweet champagne. Run the numbers. Think about your exit strategy before you even sign the contract. That is it for this week's deep dive. If you found this helpful, please share this episode with a friend who might be about to make $1 million mistake. If you have questions about a specific property or you want us to analyze a deal on the show, drop a comment or send us an email. Until next time, happy house hunting, stay disciplined, and don't buy the lemon.